But what I think is important is that people recognize equity work is not just about, this negative, listing out all of the wrongdoings that have ever been wrong to every person of color in this country. It's about making space for joy, for identity, for liberation, for who you are, for resting, for being the fullest version of yourself. And I think when people start to think of it that way, it feels less daunting, because I know that there are a lot of well-intentioned, white or cis or straight folks who are kind of like, I don't even know where to go, because this feels like a marathon. Like I'm like, trying to climb Mount Everest. And it shouldn't feel that way. It should feel like something really exciting and life-giving to embrace like the fullest sense of humanity in yourself and others.
Welcome to the Kindness Is podcast, where we take a deep dive into the true meaning of kindness. I'm your host, Kaitlin Johnstone, the co-founder of Kind Cotton. Let's dive in.
Wake up.
There is not a day that goes by that I don't look at my daughter and feel this immense amount of joy and sadness at the same time. There is not a day that's gone by recently where I don't continually question our shared humanity. What I will tell you is that conversations such as the one that I had today with our guest bring me a little bit of joy and a lot of hope. And hope is something that I think that we need to continue to hold on to while we continue to walk down a path of ensuring that we fight for humanity, that we embrace one another, that we come together and ensure that things such as equity and inclusion are at the forefront of education, are at the forefront of our everyday lives, because if not, then what? I know that I will continue to do everything that I can, not only for my child, but for all children, so that when children look back 30 years from now, they see that there were adults who tried everything that they could to ensure that humanity remains sacred. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Kindness Is pod. I'm really excited today. As you all know, I am a former educator, so whenever I get another educator in this space, I'm just the happiest human on the face of the planet. So today I have Dr. Deonna Smith. She is also a former teacher and school leader and educational justice advocate. With over a decade of experience, Deonna has worked with students and teachers in grades K through 12, and even in the higher education setting. As a student, teacher, DEI practitioner, and administrator, Deonna saw firsthand how inequitable our schools could be. But she also saw the potential for schools to be spaces of liberation and joy. Her passion for connecting theory with practice led her to pursue and complete her doctoral degree in education and social justice. Now she works with education stakeholders across the country to fight for joyful, inclusive, and equitable spaces for students. And her latest book, Rooted in Joy, Creating a Classroom Community of Equity, Belonging, and Care, is a guide that blends that theory narrative and practical tools that can help teachers across the country. Deonna, that is an impressive resume.
Yeah, it's kind of long, but yeah, hi.
But it's so good. Do you know that whenever I have someone on, I always like pick and choose and tweak some things. And as I was looking at yours, I'm like, this is all too pertinent. Like I felt like I couldn't leave out pieces because it all just beautifully exemplified what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much. It has definitely been a journey, but it's crazy how every single piece of that journey positioned me to this moment. Like right here, right now, you recording this, I feel like it was all designed. So excited to talk more about that with you.
Absolutely. What kind of inspired you to go in that direction? Because as you said, it all kind of goes together. It's all been kind of rooted in educational practices. And I'm curious how you got your start.
Yeah, so I wanted to be a teacher as a child, but I grew up, and I talk a lot about this in the book. I grew up in like an all white environment. I grew up in Eastern Washington and Spokane. So, and I grew up in a very, you know, I'm aging myself, but I grew up in a very different time than a lot of our students. Like there was no even Princess Tiana. There was no Black Little Mermaid. There's no representate. Like it was just a very different time. And so I grew up really not seeing myself in the role of being a teacher. And so I didn't really think of myself as somebody that could do that. And I had really good teachers, but they weren't teachers that really saw me as like a young Black woman, really. And so it was something that I thought about, but never really something that I felt was accessible until I was finishing up college, and I wanted to actually go teach internationally. And then I was thinking about it, and I was just realized that there was probably a lot of Black girls who would really have appreciated having like me in their classroom. Like I've never, even to this day, never had a Black teacher in undergrad, graduate, doctoral degree, elementary, nothing, never had a Black teacher. And so, and I went to school in California. So it's like, it's not like I was, you know, in Iowa or anything. I've been in California, never had a Black teacher. So I was just realizing that like, it was on me to kind of be that. Like if that wasn't there, then someone was going to do it, and it might as well have been me. And so it really led me to this very purposeful, very beautiful season of being a classroom teacher. And I loved every minute of it. I started out in East Oakland, teaching 5th grade, and I taught like a lot of other things in between, but it slowly morphed into me really becoming the kind of diversity person on my campus. And I use that with air quotes because I know y'all know what I'm talking about. Before the world was attuned to these issues post 2020, I was, you know, walking around with a copy of Culturally Responsive Teaching in the brain and like trying to get people to talk about it. And it just kind of grew from there. And I've just been so grateful to be able to not just have like a strong history of like getting results for my kids, like the results that unfortunately matter, like moving them, you know, like them doing well in standardized testing and really seeing some great growth in my students, but also carrying that like that torch for joy and culturally responsiveness and equity. And so really my jobs have kind of morphed, and I've just kind of like gone along with it. And the book is this last iteration that really came from people asking me all the time on social media all of these questions. And I was like, I need a way to comprehensively answer all of these questions instead of listening to my stories. And here we are now.
That's incredible. And for the people listening who may not know, I know we have a lot of educators, probably predominantly educators or people who really care about the educational space who listen. But anyone else who may be listening, like my mom, for example, who doesn't know, hey, mom, who doesn't know what culturally responsive teaching is. Can you explain that really quickly?
Yeah. So culturally responsive teaching is one kind of branch of the asset pedagogy tree, which is basically a school of thought that believes that instead of seeing all of the ways that our students are lacking, what they're not doing, where they don't fit, instead we recognize that schools should be designed and altered to meet the needs of our students, and that our students are not lacking and empty when they come to school, but rather like very full, you know, brilliant, you know, little baby geniuses. And we use just a variety of tools to unlock that genius. And so, you know, joyful and inclusive teaching, culturally responsive teaching, ethnic studies pedagogy, anti-racist teaching, all of that is just branches on the on the asset-based pedagogy tree. So it's just a way of approaching education that's a little bit different than the standard, what some of us listening might have experienced, right? Where you go to school, you're wrong, the teacher is right, you're sitting, you're listening, you're, you know, writing 100 facts down in a minute and kind of, you know, cut and dry. It's really moving away from that model.
And I think that's something that all children benefit from.
Yeah.
And we get wrapped up in this, people who don't understand what it is, thinking that it's not going to be beneficial for a student who may look like me, right? And then like you get all these things floating around that are complete misinformation and misguided. And I mean, when I was still kind of the icing on the cake for me, When I left the district that I was in, there were a lot of things going on. But one of the things that happened in the end is that we had this incredible, incredible man come in and kind of give us a training on culturally responsive teaching, right? And this was in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And it may have even been 2021. I'm not quite sure. And the backlash that
Yeah.
was received from white educators and white parents was unlike anything I had ever experienced. And I should not have been shocked, right? Like, that's the thing. There should be no shock at this point, or even back then. And it was something that I was extremely vocal about, like the point where people are like, Kaitlin, why are you making this such a big deal? I'm like, because everyone in this district looks like me. And if people who look like me are not saying something about this, what is happening now in Florida is going to happen. And people thought, like, what do you mean? Like, there's no way that books are going to be pulled from shelves or accurate history is not going to be taught.
Yeah.
And look where we are.
Yep. Yeah.
It's scary.
It is scary, and and that's why I always say and help people understand the pedagogical underpinnings and the theoretical underpinnings of culture responsive teaching, equity, belonging, care is in asset pedagogies. Asset pedagogies are not, racialized. I mean, they impact different races differently, but it doesn't come from a school of thought that's rooted in a nefarious idea about race. It's just seeing kids and recognizing that, yes, our kids are bringing their whole cultures to the table. And that is, and I think it's because also white folks have a hard time conceptualizing that they too, in fact, do have a culture. So they're also bringing their culture to the table, but it's kind of hard to think of yourself as having a culture when your culture is the dominant culture, right? So I think it's hard for people. And there's a lot of fear. And what's interesting about education is that everybody knows and is well aware and says that, the reason why they're motivated to advocate for these things is because we know it's not working, right? I mean, no one's delusional and thinking that we're doing, education and schooling is going like super duper well. And that was even before 2020. So I think if we all understand that it's not working well, then if you really look at asset pedagogies for what they are and not whatever mass media you're consuming is trying to tell you that it is, you'll see that there's a lot there for all students. And it's about humanizing our experiences. It's not about, it's not about what folks are being misinformed into thinking that it's about.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was way better than how I was describing it.
No, we're building off each other here.
Yeah, I think it's important that we have these conversations in case there is anyone who may be misguided by media right now, particularly. So I'm curious, explain to us particularly what you are doing now, working with schools to build a more asset-based approach to learning, to build in more joy, how joy and equity is all wrapped up into one. And I know I just gave you like 5 separate questions there, but tell me all about it.
Yeah. So to start with, it's really important for people to understand that joy and equity work and all of this is deeply interwoven. And I think I think you probably experience this a lot with your message of kindness, right? People think that they can divorce kindness from identity. People think that you can divorce kindness from equity. But how can you be kind to somebody if you tell them that their culture and who they are has no place in the school building? I mean, you can't. That's just not how kindness works. And so I think for a lot of folks, we have to look deeper than, just the surface level of kindness and joy, and see that when you're joyful with your students, they are joyfully able to be the fullest version of themselves. So I'll give you an example that I was just reading about just today. So there's a senior in Texas who has dreadlocks and who was expelled for having dreadlocks, right? And if you look at this school, if you go and look up the school, one of their values is kindness. The other one is respect. They have all of these school values on their website. So how do you have a school value of respect and kindness when you basically told somebody that the way that their hair comes out of their head is like you can be expelled for that? So I think it's on all of us to embrace a deeper understanding of kindness and joy, and we'll see how equity work just goes along with that. And I'm very intentional about bringing in joy, because I think what did happen unintentionally in the wake of the much needed social justice revolutions that we experienced in 2020 was that people got this idea that equity work is like this really hard, nasty, arduous, back-breaking, bend over labor. Like, you're just like toiling away at equity work. And I think that like that's because of where we were as a country, because like, I mean, it was hard. That was a hard summer. The summer 2020, you had to be there, right? That was like that was the wildest summer. I don't think we'll ever experience anything like that. So it was really hard in that moment. But what I think is important is that people recognize equity work is not just about, this negative, listing out all of the wrongdoings that have ever been wrong to every person of color in this country. It's about making space for joy, for identity, for liberation, for who you are, for resting, for being the fullest version of yourself. And I think when people start to think of it that way, it feels less daunting, because I know that there are a lot of well-intentioned, white or cis or straight folks who are kind of like, I don't even know where to go, because this feels like a marathon. Like I'm like, trying to climb Mount Everest. And it shouldn't feel that way. It should feel like something really exciting and life-giving to embrace like the fullest sense of humanity in yourself and others. And so for me, it's all about operationalizing that. So all of those are really cool ideas. But what my job is to go into schools and classrooms and really narrow down in systems and practices and policies that are stopping that from happening, and directly coaching teachers and leaders on how to stop doing those things and what to start doing. So it's kind of taking this really big idea. And that's why I always talk about blending theory with practice, because again, in my doctoral program, I write a dissertation, I read a lot of books, and there's all these big ideas. But I put for the teacher that's listening that is like, okay, yes, right. And then goes to school the next day and is like, I agree with Deonna, but I don't know what in God's name she's talking about, because
how do I do it?
I have 28 kids and like 4 are absent today. And then, my observations tomorrow, and I have a cold and I should really be at home. So I take all of those big things and operationalize them and help people recognize how they can do that on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, and what that really looks like in practice, if that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. And as I'm listening to you, I am wishing that there were a million clones of you all across the US, and that this was required of every school, because that's how much I'm hearing what you're saying and how much I believe in what you were saying. How long do you typically work with a school? Do you go in just for, because it seems to me like this is something that should be ongoing.
So usually what happens, and this is kind of like the dance that I do with schools, it's like a little courtship dance. Usually they're like, okay, we can give you 45 minutes on one Wednesday. And then, we start, and the teachers like have a turnaround with a parent that they've always struggled with, or like are building a relationship with a kid that they usually have to kick out to the office. And then they're like, wait, we need way, way, way more of this. So it usually starts off with just one session. And I get it, because people are overwhelmed and they've got a lot going on. And there's so many things like to try to fit into that calendar. My goodness. And then I'm always a proponent of, like, if whatever you can make an email and skip the meeting. But I always say that my professional developments are, these are meetings that could not have been emails. You really need to be there. And then usually if the school is open to it, we shift into doing more coaching. And so that's what I love, because I can go into the classrooms, I can talk to the teachers, they send me videos, I build relationships, and we talk about like this particular student, and it kind of grows from there. And it usually starts with maybe your classroom culture. But then what people realize too is, like, right now we are in a crisis of like engagement, where teachers feel like they basically have to put on a three-ring circus to even get kids to watch them for more than 2 minutes at a time. So once we start talking about culture, then we talk about, okay, well, let's talk about differentiation and your tier 1 structures that you have for instruction. And let's talk about like making centers, feasible for you. And let's talk about your grading policies. Like, where is inequity showing up in your grading policies? So we kind of get deeper and deeper and deeper. And so it's usually starts with like one session, but then I love it when, a school will say like, hey, we have a year, we're going to do monthly meetings, and to replace like one of our grade level meetings. And that meeting is focused on building that teacher's tools. And then they have it for the rest of their teaching careers, and they, spread it to the rest of the people in the classroom. So I'm really trying to build a movement here.
I am here for it. I am number one cheerleader. I want this to be a movement everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, there's one of me, but if I can get like, or sometimes I get to coach an instructional coach, and that's when I really get excited, because it's like, if I can like download some of this into the instructional coach, boom, then it's like, then it catches like wildfire. So that's typically kind of the cadence of how it works.
And are schools now purchasing your book at wholesale and like doing book studies surrounding it? Because I feel like the two, having read it, obviously it's all about what you were doing, and they really coincide with the work. So I'm wondering how that has fallen into place for you.
That has been so fun because there's also like a lot of, so the more information you can get from the book, the less talking I have to do, and the more like work you can do. So I like to assign the book as kind of like a preset, and then that's like their pre-work, their homework. They can read it at their own time, whenever at soccer practice, or just hang out on the weekends, and then we can jump in, and then they have really good questions, because they're like, okay, on page 26 you said da 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 da, but I have a student that does this, so what would you do in this case scenario, right? They can give you the really specific questions, and we can dig even deeper. So usually, right now schools are doing the book studies. I'm working on a bunch of just free resources, so if you can't do a book study with me personally, someone at your school can do a book study. So, my thing is just getting the information out there. So working on this book and having it as a reference for people, and people have already, they send me questions on Instagram now from the books too.
I'm sure.
Because, I have teachers all across the country, and unfortunately there are some schools that are not open to this work, because they just see the word equity on the cover and they're like, oh, she is talking about critical race theory, something crazy like that. So I also try to make myself available to individual teachers, because I get it. It's so hard to get, we're just not prepared in our teacher education programs to meet this moment. And it's rough. And if your district won't help you, then it's kind of like, just good luck, sink or swim, and then they get burnt out in like a year and a half. So I also help teachers directly as much as I can too.
That's amazing, because having been an educator in the state of Florida particularly, I mean, I focused on all of this and no one ever said anything to me ever. Like people are like, what do you mean? Like, you didn't have parents come into your classroom saying, how dare you teach XYZ? How dare you do that? And I was like, nope, never. I mean, never was a thing. I had books in my classroom that showcased two moms or two dads. I had books in my classroom that celebrated Black excellence and joy, and now they're in some places being taken off shelves. No one ever, all I ever received, I mean, of course you get angry parents throughout 8 years of teaching, right? Over like silly things, maybe. But it was never really more like a reflection on me. It was more like an overarching school policy or something. All I ever got was, Miss Lambert, because I was an educator most of the time prior to being married, Miss Lambert, like, you were amazing. We love all that you did for my child. We love that you saw my child. We love that you embraced my child. And then all of this
Yeah.
happened. And when I tell people all the time, this is one thing where you can kind of listen to some news about it. Like, books really are pulled from shelves.
Yeah.
My educator friends in the state of Florida truly are facing some horrific things. Like my best friend in the state of Florida, she is married to a woman and she can't even have a picture on her desk of her wife. Like, just simple horrific things that are happening, right? And it's making an impact. So